Hello and welcome to the Oxygen Addict podcast. We're brought to you every week by our sponsors Precision Fuel and Hydration.com. You can personalize your fueling and hydration strategy so you perform at your best with 15% off your first order of electrolytes and carbohydrate fuel with the code OA23 at precisionfuelandhydration.com. Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm your host, Coach Rob Wilby, and I'm joined by Coach Chris Palfreman. Chris, how are you today?
Hello, Rob. I'm very well, thank you.
Awesome stuff. Great to have you with us, buddy. And every week we bring you an episode of this podcast to help motivate and inspire you. We want to wish you all a very happy new year. Welcome to 2024. We're going to bring you a special episode today titled New Year's Resolutions, Ironman Goal Setting, and Your Best Season Yet. And our aim with this is to get you all in the mindset of planning out how this season is going to be the best one that you guys have ever had. So a couple of things you could do for us, please. If you like this episode, please follow us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And if you're watching on YouTube, you could click like and subscribe. That really helps the growth of the show. And secondly, if you're looking for help and advice with your training, please get in touch with us. You can email us at help@oxygenaddict.com. Or there's a link in the show notes. I think we've got the best all-over solution for age group triathlon coaching. We'd love to have a chat with you about how we could work with you and make this season the best one ever for you yet. So, Chris, let's jump right into it. I hope you have had a great Christmas season with your family. I know that ours has been really awesome. And really, it's trying to get into the mindset of this is the new year. Let's put Christmas behind us and let's look forward and give our athletes something to look forward to as well. So that's really what our plan was, setting out this episode for the first episode of 2024, essentially. So first up, mate, let's talk about, I don't know about you, but I think I slightly overindulge a little bit during the Christmas break. And I always have the best of intentions not to, but I always end up partying a bit too much, going out a bit too much, staying up a bit too late, not quite doing the exercise I planned on doing. And I get to the first week in January and think, right, okay, it's time to refocus and resettle in. And so this episode really couldn't have come at a better time, could it?
First off, Happy New Year, everyone. New year, new us, which is pretty
let's hope so, hey?
Yeah. Secondly, Rob, you're looking pretty lean. So I don't know what your secret was. Maybe you were hiding some salad.
I love it. But... I love it, Chris. We've got the New Year's compliments happening already. You as well, my friend. But then you always look lean, so I appreciate it.
Thanks very much. It's a strange time of year, though, isn't it? Because we've kind of transitioned. I feel like there are two transitions that we've all been through as athletes. One is transitioning away from that November, December build, where a lot of athletes are actually starting to really gather momentum within their training, and their race ready scores are on the up. And then suddenly the coaches asking the athletes to put on the brakes and say, hey, relax a little bit over the Christmas period. What's going to happen is going to happen. We're going to eat a little bit too much. Sleep's going to be disrupted. Training's not going to be the priority. It's all about family and festivities, which is absolutely fine. And then what's hard is transitioning out of that and going from the really relaxed lifestyle back into the, oh, hey, I'm a serious athlete. I've got some big goals that I'm working towards. And that kind of the nuanced transition between casual mindset and, right, I'm going to hit my goals is a really tricky one. And for some people, that will just happen overnight and January the 1st, ready to kick off. But for others, it might take a good 10 days for athletes to find that rhythm, to find that structure, and for actually the body to bounce back from the sessions that you're doing. So keep that in the back of your mind that everyone's slightly different. And just because your training partner or your friend is bouncing back amazingly quickly and it looks like they're nailing things, your time will come, and just appreciate that it takes a little bit more time for some people, maybe.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's worth revisiting the idea that the Christmas week falls great if you've had the end of a big block. It falls as a great week to take that week of downtime away from focused training and have the focus be on something else and really help yourself, take some downtime from a big block of training and get ready to go again. And I think that's just the lens people have got to look at it through. One thing we do see with athletes, though, is we tend to have a very sort of all or nothing mindset a lot of the time. If we're focused on training, we're totally focused on training. If we're focused on partying, we're totally focused on partying. And so that switch between the two can be difficult. And I'm hopeful that 1 week being over Christmas is going to be enough to give the athletes a mental reset and then get ready to hit the ground running again come the start of January. So I think really the focus of this podcast today is going to be to say, we're going to sit down with a pad of paper and we're going to sketch out some goals for the new year. What's the best way we can do that? What's the process we can go through so we get to the end of it and we've got something really workable? So on that, we've got 5 or 6 talking points here to work through with athletes that will hopefully help give them that framework. And the first one to kick off with, I think, is around setting realistic goals for the season. It's about sitting down with your pad of paper and saying, this is essentially where I would like to be at the end of the season. This is where I am now. And how do I bridge the gap between the two? So for a lot of athletes, it might be that they've got a very clearly defined goal for what they want their big races for the season to be. And if you haven't got that yet, that's okay. But it's a really good time to sit down and focus on what that is, because we found time and time again that the athletes who've got that goal in place can now focus on the training and start building a roadmap to get to it. I think it's great to have a bit more of a relaxed mindset towards it, but it's so much easier if you've got a goal race to shoot towards. And it really helps these sessions, especially early in the year when the weather's still pretty hard, makes it really easier to crack into that training, doesn't it?
Totally. And would you suggest that athletes look for what we'd call an A race before they map out a B and C? So you start with the A race and then a B and C fit in towards that goal, or actually get all the races down on a piece of paper and see where you end up? What's your advice on that, Rob?
Well, I think a lot of our athletes start off by, they kind of make almost like a mind map of it, and they write down all the things that they're interested in doing that year. I think that's a good starting point. Here are all these things I'm interested in doing. And then work out which of these ones or which 2 of these ones feel like the biggest goals you want to do. And then work back from that and add the other races in around it. So typically we'll have a B race on the way to the A race. And typically we can have athletes have up to 2 A races in a season. So there we've got a bit of a structure where we've got an A race with a B race somewhere in the region of 4 or 5 weeks before it. And for a lot of athletes, they tend to have an early season A race, maybe something in June, and then a later season A race, maybe something in September, October time, and then fit the other races in around that. And then that way it gives us a bit of structure to the season where we can work back from it and chuck in those C races along the way. Not that they're not important to athletes, but they can be used more as benchmarks along the way rather than their actual most important races of the year.
That's really good. I remember going through this process quite a lot, and I was nearly an over planner at times, I think. But one strategy for a few athletes, and this isn't going to be applicable for everyone, but there might be 1 or 2 athletes listening that might be able to enjoy this, which is essentially the annual cycle for me got fairly monotonous in some ways. It's like, oh, okay, I've done my 2 big A races, a couple of B races, a C race, get to December, absolutely knackered, and then I go again in January and more or less replicate the structure, which is fine. But if you're an athlete that likes the long-term plan, for me that really helps. So I sketched out a 4 or 5 year plan, and I sat down and I thought, where do I want to be in triathlon in 4 or 5 years' time? What would I have liked to tick off, whether it's some major races that I've always fancied doing, or some particular times that I'd like to hit, or shooting for some particular placings in age group, for example. And having that 4 or 5 years down the line kind of anchored me down in the kind of monotonous cycle of season upon season upon season. And it helped me deal with the fact that, okay, I've done those 2 major stepping stones this year. Next year, I've got those 3 major stepping stones, and then that means I'll be there, and then I've got 2 more to go. And it kind of helped me kind of create a really clear pathway towards the thing that really excited me, which in my case was shooting for Kona. It could be a whole host of different events or goals for individuals. So it's a small piece of advice, but it's maybe look a little bit further than 12 months if long-term planning excites you within that process.
I think that's a really great tip, especially for athletes who've sort of been in the sport for a long time. That long-term view can really be something that helps get you through. And, you've used the word monotony there. I prefer to use the word routine. I think it's the
Mm.
idea of getting yourself into a process based. We've got to start with that big goal, and often the goal is an outcome based one, and then to switch that around and go, right, what are the processes that I can tick off along the way? Because ultimately, so many things can happen along the way. You can't control whether you're going to go 9:30 in a race in 3 years' time. So it's to turn that around to a process based process and think, right, I can control whether I get to the pool twice this week, whether I get my bike sessions done this week, and swap that around there. But yeah, I really like that, Chris. I really like having the long term view of something that I think you were very wise in your early athletic career and appreciating that your big goal was something was going to take you several seasons to achieve, and accepting that. I think that's something that a lot of people can learn from for sure. Yeah, it's great.
Mm. It also gives you a bit more wiggle room. It means that if you have call it a poor race this year or last year, it doesn't totally derail your overall goal that really excites you. It might derail your 6 months, for example, but that's okay. Taking a step back every so often isn't the worst thing, as long as you know, and as long as you learn along the way. But I think, yeah, for me, it was always that anchoring of it doesn't matter what happens along the way, because I'm still going towards that really exciting goal, and there'll be some setbacks along the way, and that's all part of the journey. So yeah, have a think a little bit outside the box maybe, and plan your next 3, 5 years maybe where you'd like to be.
I like that. So our next talking point is around maintaining motivation for athletes. And I think what you've just said leads really nicely into this. It can be a real challenge for athletes, especially when they're multiple seasons in, to find a way to maintain the motivation for something. And I was always really lucky. I think my motivation came largely through this idea of having a thing in the future that I want to aim for. But I always got a real satisfaction from ticking off the sessions day by day and making a plan at the start of a week and getting that plan done. And obviously, we're going back a few years here even before Training Peaks was really a thing, and having those nice electronic boxes that change color. I used to have like a piece of paper on the wall that I would cross sessions off. We're going really old school back in the day.
Hmm.
What were some of the things you used to maintain your motivation? You talked there about it being a 5-year goal for you to get to Kona. What are some of the tricks you used to keep your motivation high along the way?
Uh, I think 90s hip hop helped me a lot.
Do you know, I was thinking music as well was part of it. Yeah, go on, talk about that.
Yeah, it's a bit of tongue in cheek, but honestly, especially in the UK winter, I ended up doing the vast majority of my training indoors, and I just can't do it in silence. My head totally gets off course. So having music that genuinely kind of motivates me and keeps me pumped up. And for me at the time, it was 90s hip hop, and I could never go wrong with it. So using music, even though I said it as a bit of a joke, is a genuine tool. And that complements the likes of, Zwift and indoor training really well. You put those two things together, and Christ, indoor training's so much easier than it used to be. I used to, much like you, Rob, sit against a white wall. I had absolutely nothing, and at times I had no music in the early years, because I'd sweat so much that anything I'd put anywhere near my ears would totally melt. So yeah, I think we're very, very lucky these days that we've got basically a full immersive experience. A lot of us have got amazing turbos that can move around with, with wind and with hills, all that stuff. So make the most of it. And if you're going to do a lot of your training indoors, don't be afraid to invest. Invest big. Invest in good sound system. Invest in really good bike, whether it's a kicker bike or the bike that you're using. Make sure you're really comfortable on it. Don't hack around. Don't mess around. This is a really important phase of your training. So if you can invest in comfortable kit, really good shorts, make sure you use chamois cream, all that stuff to basically give yourself a chance of suffering in the right way as opposed to suffering in the wrong way. Suffering in the wrong way is because you get bad saddle sores, for example, because you're using the wrong shorts. But suffering in the right way could mean, well, you got through to the last 2 minutes of a really hard interval, but you pushed yourself to hit the original targets. That's the kind of suffering that we want at this stage. So keep that in the back of your mind. Other than that, to me, I loved I loved routine. I loved waking up on a Tuesday knowing that I've got that session, and that's going to be followed by that session tomorrow. It grounded me. It kept me on the straight and narrow. It really helped me at work as well, actually. So doing a session before work and doing a session after work, even if it was only 45 minutes to an hour, I just felt so much better to get those two sessions done. So much like you, Rob, I think I was lucky in the fact that I just love training and I love endurance sports. And at times it gets really tough, but all in all, with a bit of 90s hip hop, can't go wrong.
I was going to say earlier, the idea of having the playlist to train to. I don't know about you, but in modern life as a grown up, you don't very often get to listen to loud music, right?
Mm.
That's one of the things I really enjoy doing is putting the headphones on and playing loud rock music as I'm training because it's the only chance I get in a day to listen to music. And especially for people who work at home a lot and don't get to commute, that's something I realized that I really missed was listening to music in the car as part of a commute. So get yourself a really decent playlist that inspires you to train hard. Get it cranked up loud and get listening to it. I think that's great tips there, Chris. Nice work.
Mm. Good stuff.
So we've mentioned there about the next talking point, which is developing a detailed training plan. Now, the athletes that we coach, that's already done for them. They've got a training plan there that's structured out in front of them, and they know exactly what they've got to do that week, and they know exactly what they've got to do the week after, and they can see the plan all the way to race day. And that sort of the structure of working out what to do is all kind of taken care of for people. So if you're listening and you're not coached at the moment, that's something that I really think you can benefit from is even if you don't really know what you're doing, get yourself some kind of plan that means you know what you're going to be doing in a given week and sketch out what you're going to be doing between now and race day. And then think of it this way, you are going to have this structured plan in place to get you where you want to go, especially if you're racing Ironman. So have that thing in place. And if you sit down and think, actually, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm just jumping on a bike or a treadmill and doing sessions, that's telling you something. Go out and get help from someone who knows what they're doing. And if you want to chat to us about it, absolutely great. We'd love to chat to you. But this isn't a sales pitch for us. This is to say the best way to get you where you want to be is to have a detailed training plan. And if you haven't got one, fix that now. Fix it at the start of January so you know what you're doing. Because I mean, we've all been there, haven't we? And just jumped on and done a session for the sake of it. Having that long-term structure is so, so important.
I think that's a really timely point as we kind of head into the early weeks of January, where maybe training hasn't been our priority over Christmas. Absolutely fine. But then the athletes that may not be coached, there's a tendency for those athletes to really get an amazing start in January. And they'll be going to the gym 4 times a week. They'll be swimming 6 times a week. They'll be riding 5 times a week. They'll be running 6 times a week. And that looks brilliant on paper, but we know that that's unsustainable for a whole host of reasons, whether it's physically, mentally, logistically. You just can't keep that kind of training up. And physically, obviously, there's going to be potential health risks along the way. So if you are what we call a self-coached athlete, please be really wary that your most likely danger is to be overdoing things in January. We want the hardest, the longest, the most overload training to be in the lead up to that A race, call it 70.3 or an Ironman. It's that kind of 8-week window where, yes, the sessions will start to look really long then, but by then you would have built to that. So actually, when you see 6 hours in your plan, it doesn't feel otherworldly because you've been building from 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, and then 5 and 6 hours. But if you start doing those 4, 5, 6 hour monster sessions in January, yeah, it's going to make a lot of other athletes jealous at the time, but realistically, you're going to be an athlete that's really, really struggling in those 8 weeks, and more importantly, on that event day. So there's a game of patience here. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and that's very much applicable to 70.3 and Ironman.
Yeah, 100% couldn't agree more. So if you are a self-coached athlete out there, at the very least, treat yourself to a new book on training. Go to Amazon and get yourself a book on how to train and sit down and spend a little bit of time planning. Like I said, if you want to talk to us, we'd love to talk to new athletes, and we've got space in the team at the moment for new athletes. But this is more about making sure that you know what you're doing from day to week to month leading up to your race. And so you've got the habit in place that's going to work for you. Now, on
I'd
that,
also,
let's talk
sorry,
about
Rob.
habit formations. That's all right, mate.
I
Go on.
was about to jump in, but yeah, let me jump in and you tell me if we need to redirect it to another part of the podcast. But there's another really common kind of red flag for me, which is the self-coached athlete, which I was for a period of time, so I can relate to this. You'll end up picking 2, 3, 4 books to kind of guide your training philosophy and your training plan, and that's absolutely brilliant. There's a whole host of amazing books out there. But what's really, really difficult is after 2 or 3 months, you're going to start having this voice in your head saying, oh, but hey, you haven't done any VO2, or, well, you haven't done any track sessions. And you look out the window and you see other people running much faster than you, or seeing people doing 6-hour rides in February. And you're thinking, oh, if they're doing it, I must be doing it, but that doesn't fit in my book. So what I'll do is I'll do a hybrid. I'll stick to what the book says, but I'll slap on a load of volume or a load of VO2 or a load of strength work at different times in the season. And that's again where we can end up in a real dark hole, physically and also mentally. So my advice on that is pick a philosophy that makes total logical sense, and that you'd be happy to share with another family member, another friend, and then stay true to that. And if it's mostly endurance based and easy pace running, for example, then do that all the way. Don't do that for 80% and then, completely change the philosophy because other people are suggesting that that's the way to go. We know that there are so many different ways of training, but we also know that there are very few successful ways for the majority of people to get to their targets. So try and not mix and match too many different philosophies, because that's again a way where you're not going to get the benefit from either of them and you'll end up burning out quicker than you think.
Yeah. I think it's worth reiterating here. There are lots of different ways of training. There are lots and lots of different ways, and all of them are equally valid. And just because, I have a very specific philosophy that I've come to over the years, and it's based around largely trying to stop people making the kind of mistakes that I saw athletes make in my early days as a coach, and stopping people making mistakes essentially that are going to get in the way of them getting what they want. And I've said this lots of times, I really care about keeping athletes in the sport for the longest possible time. I really care about athletes' health. I really care about trying to keep athletes free of injury. Now, that's not to say that coaches who talk about the importance of high intensity training or, pick any kind of thing, that I'm sure there are people who have an awful lot of success going and doing CrossFit type activity, but it's not what I believe in as a coach. And I've got a philosophy that helps an awful lot of athletes an awful lot of the time. I think the core of what you said there, Chris, is so true. If you've got a philosophy that you're working to and it's working for you, yeah, there's also all the kinds of training you can do as well. But the mixing and matching thing isn't going to work. That's the real difficulty, isn't it? When an athlete comes to me and says, you've got this plan laid out in front of me, but I've also read that this athlete or this pro has done this kind of session and I want to try it. It's not that we're saying that doesn't work. It's certainly not we're saying it doesn't work for that athlete, but we can't just chuck things into the mix. Everything's got to work together and fit together. And, even to the point where if an athlete is sort of saying, well, you took VO2 max sessions there as an example. And I think that's a really good one because they are sexy. They are the shiny thing on the tree. They are something that an athlete can talk to their mate about down the pub. I did 20 by a minute on a minute's recovery. It's really, really high intensity. It really, really hurts. It'll give you loads of feel-good hormones after doing it. But is it particularly specific to an athlete who's doing long-distance triathlon? It isn't really. And so that's why we don't do very much of it. We do some of it, But the important thing to realize is that your VO2 max is affected by all the training that you do. And just because you haven't done a session titled a VO2 max session doesn't mean that your VO2 max isn't increasing. Your VO2 max is going to increase because of all the training that you do. It's just we're not doing a certain specific kind of session within our methodology very often for long distance triathlon. So yeah, I think you're dead right. It's whatever you're doing to have faith in the system for the reasons that you're doing it and stick with that, have the faith to back it.
I think, doing everything all the time certainly doesn't work. So, yeah, I think stick to that original structure that
Yeah.
we spoke
Yeah.
about. Absolutely.
It's all down to sitting down and having a plan and making a plan and not just kind of, I think the worst possible thing an athlete can do if they're not coached is get on Zwift or Trainer Road and just pick a random session and do it because
Mm.
there is absolutely no structure behind that. Okay, so Chris, let's talk about habit formation and how we can get athletes to get into a daily routine, a weekly routine, and how that can really help. And I'm going to kick this off with an example of mine. One of my favorite habit formation things to get into was around swimming. I always found swimming the hardest of the three sports to get myself into doing. And so the habit that I would do is I would pick my 2 days of the week where I was gonna make swimming the number one priority that day. And I'd get my stuff ready the night before. I had to swim first thing in the morning. I don't know about anybody else, but that was the only routine that worked for me. I'd have the stuff ready the night before, packed by the door. I'd have the coffee machine set on the timer so the coffee was ready brewed when I came down. I knew the time I had to leave the house by, and that would be it for me. The 2 mornings of the week, I'd be out of the house at 6:07. I'd drive to the pool. I'd be in the pool at 6:30. I'd be done at 7:30. I could drive home, and some days I could even get home, get on my bike and ride to work before work was on. But it was the habit of doing that on those 2 days a week that I used to absolutely love. If I'm honest, probably more than the swimming itself. It was the
Mm.
habit of getting it done on those days.
You've seen, I don't know how many, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of athletes, of training plans, um, and people's different approaches. And I ask you, Rob, after these, however many years you've been doing this, what is the what's the session that people most commonly miss out and why? Because whatever you're about to say is going to be applicable to the majority of us listening. And then if you've seen that so many times, how have people been able to turn it around? So my question to you is, what's the most common missed session? Is it strength and conditioning, swimming, biking, or running, or something like a rest day? What do you think? What's the first answer that comes to your mind when I ask you that?
I don't think there's a missed session that I can identify from all people. But what I'd say is that there's a habit behind whatever missed session people have. There's going to be people who have their favorites and they're easy to do, but there are going to be people who have the sessions that they don't frequently get done. And so the work that I do as a coach is sitting down with people and saying, right, what are the blocks to getting you to do this thing? What's the problem you've got? And it's overcoming the challenge to the habit, I think, is the key to this, rather than saying which one session do people not want to get done. Do you kind of see where I'm coming from with
Mm.
that?
Yeah, totally. And it sounds as if planning ahead seems to be a common theme here. That
That's
is,
almost universally the thing. Yeah, that's the
mm,
thing that gets in the way of it's the it's the making the session, whatever that is, whether it's a turning up to a session that's run like a club swim session or a club run session or whatever. It's making that part of your week so that my car will drive here on autopilot on the way to work or the way back from work. It's planning that into your day if you work from home so that you've got that time sketched out and you know that that's there. And so that's, I think, the biggest takeaway. And it sounds really simple, but the thing that I give to athletes when I'm working with them one to one is to have the calendar planner out with the hourly breakdown. I use the Google Calendar thing and put the training session actually onto the day of the week in the time block, and then accept there's going to be this amount of time before and that amount of time after, and then plan it in. Because if you do, it might get done. But if you don't plan it in, it almost certainly won't do.
Yeah. And I don't know if you can relate to this, Rob, but this is kind of basically a daily battle for me, even though I absolutely love training and it's been a huge part of my life, and I think it always will be. But there's definitely times where I'm sitting in my chair thinking, shall I do that session? I've got absolutely nothing wrong with me. Fatigue levels are normal, been eating healthily, slept well, HRV totally normal. So it's not as if I've got an external metric guiding these potential negative thoughts. It's, to be honest, it's just laziness. So to me, when I'm sitting in my chair thinking, shall I do that session? That's as soon as that happens, I start getting changed to do it. Because if I start mulling it over, well, what are the pros and cons of doing this session? Maybe I'll be more rested if I don't do it. Maybe I should go and socialize and have a pint with my mate. Maybe I'll do this. Maybe I'll just do the session tomorrow and that'll be fine. But then I just spend so much of my time thinking about training and not actually doing it. So as soon as I get that thought of, shall I do the session? That is the absolute green light of, yes, go and do that session now and stop thinking about it and start doing it in the next 5 minutes. Otherwise, it's just never going to get done and it gets piled onto tomorrow, and then you're playing around with volumes and recovery rates and all that, which is potentially a big no-no. So again, if you're similar to me and you've got this slight laziness towards sessions at times because life gets pretty busy, as soon as you start thinking it is the time that you need to start lacing up your shoes.
I like that. Yeah, I really like that. That's sort of like, that's the trigger to go and get it done.
Mm.
I think one of the things that I work with athletes is that idea that if you can remove the choice from the process, that's a big part of it. If you don't have to sit and think about when you're going to do something, that's a big part of it. And to remind the athletes that training for an event is great, but doing training has the massive health benefits along the way as well. And I think it can be easy to feel selfish that you want to do the training, but I think reframing that as a look, everybody's heart needs a certain amount of exercise every day, and just that metric of the 10 to 12,000 steps a day that represents sort of 10 or 12 kilometers worth of movement every day. It can be really hard to go and do that walking. If you're not running, then carving out the time to get your body to exercise is really hard in the modern world. So think of it as a way to extend your health and life longevity as well. And it can make things a little bit easier in terms of that, that sort of feeling of selfishness, almost getting over that.
Mm. And I think if you're an athlete that's got a big, scary goal ahead, whether it's 70.3, an Ironman, a specific time in an Olympic, a marathon, anything like that, maybe this is the perfect time to be really honest with yourself. And, at the end of last year, we were talking about reviewing your last 6 months, reviewing your last 12 months and seeing where you could potentially move things around and help yourself out for the coming year. But actually, maybe you just need to be really honest with yourself and have a look back at the last year even and try and highlight how many sessions you missed due to, and this is, I'm not saying it in a negative way, but due to laziness. And that's the word I'm using for myself. And there have definitely been seasons where I could at least pick 10 sessions, let's say, that I've missed, not because of illness, not because of travel, not because of work, anything like that. It was a genuine kind of internal laziness stopped me doing those sessions. And yes, that is going to have a negative impact come race day, because we know that there is going to be enforced time off because of travel, holidays, illness, work, family, all those things kind of bring interruptions to our training. So don't let the laziness or the kind of internal negative voice be an extra time away from training. So every training session is a genuine opportunity. It's an opportunity to better yourself. It's an opportunity to build on the foundations that you've already got. And it's an absolute luxury. There are hundreds of thousands of people around the world they'd be dreaming of the freedom of being able to do what they want to do. And don't want to get too deep on that, but I think you can kind of get what I'm saying here, which is it's an opportunity. Grab it with both hands. And at times it feels like it's a chore, it's painful, it's another session where I've got to work really hard. Yeah, it is. And that is the beauty of the sport. And that's what's going to help you become a really strong athlete, not just for this year, but also future years as well. So that's my message for this podcast, really, is grab the opportunity. It's a genuine luxury. It's a pleasure. It's something that could be taken away from us at any time for any reason. So every session for me, especially nowadays, I always find myself smiling, whatever the session, whether it's indoors, outdoors, short run, long run. I just love it. And I hope that some athletes listening get a little bit of buzz thinking, oh, actually, yeah, I'm really gonna commit this year, and I'm gonna hit all the sessions that are within my grasp.
Nice. And listen, I think that brings us to the last talking point I put down, which is the importance of having a support system around you for your training and supporting your training, whether that's friends, whether that's family, whether that's teammates, training partners. It can be so much easier to commit to a big goal when you're sure that the other people around you are aligned with you as well. And so if you've got someone you can count on to go and train with once a week or twice a week, brilliant. If you've got teammates you can talk to about the training, whether it's going well or whether you need a bit of help, brilliant. But I think the most important thing here is having your closest family aligned with what you want to do, and sit down with them and talk with them and explain to them what it is you want to do, explain how important it is to you, but then listen to their feedback about these things as well. Because I think having the family on board and having them pulling alongside you and helping you is an absolutely wonderful thing. But you have to be honest with your family about what you want and how much time it's going to take and the commitment of it. And you have to be honest when you get feedback from your family about what their experience of you and your training for a goal of that size is, and make sure that's aligned. And in almost all cases, it will be. But in the ones where it won't, I think it's really worth taking heed of that and having a little listen and making sure that what you want to do and what you want to achieve aligns with the bigger goal there as well. That just about brings us to the end of this week's show. I think we'll wrap this up. There's some discount codes and deals for you all at precisionfuelandhydration.com. You can use the code OA23 for 15% off your first electrolyte order. I tell you what, Chris, I got a little parcel through the post just before Christmas. I wasn't expecting anything and opened it, and it was a little photo book from PF&H that they've sent out to people of the things that they've been up to during the year, and it covered them like doing some of the gravel races abroad, going to Ironman Hawaii, going to Ironman Champs in Nice, and some of the stuff those guys got up to. Talk about guerrilla marketing. They had, I don't know if you saw this, but I missed it at the time. They had these huge inflatable PF&H water bottles that were turned into backpacks. And they had people running up and down alongside the prom in Nice and people paddleboarding out with these things on the back. It looks like they just had the best year. And the number of people they had supporting them out in Nice in particular, cheering people on, just looked amazing. So yeah, it looks like those guys have had a great year and it's gone from strength to strength for them. If you guys listening haven't used them yet, use the code OA23 for 15% off your first electrolyte order. But it's so important to get the right balance of electrolytes, fluid and carbs in for your training and for your racing. And if you're not sure about that or you're completely new to it, the easy solution is to go to the Precision Fuel and Hydration website, use their free fuel and hydration planning tool. That'll do all the heavy lifting for you. And it'll basically give you guidance for how much sodium you need, how much carbs you need, and how much fluid you need per hour in training. And then you practice that in training and you'll have it right on race day. And lastly, if you're looking for help with your triathlon training for this year, I think we've got the most comprehensive endurance sports coaching program for busy age groupers. Please, if you're not sure about your training, book a call with us. We can see if you'd be a good fit for joining the team, and we can see how we can best help you out going into the new season. I hope you are all really excited about your races going into the new year. I know we are. We're really super excited for this year, and we'd love to help you out and have you on the team going forwards. So remember, there's links in the show notes, so you don't have to remember them. Until next week, have a great, safe training and racing week. I'm Coach Rob Wilby. He's Coach Chris Palfreyman, and you've been listening to the Oxygenetic Podcast.